A quickly note on the topic that we're going to cover today, called the aestheticization of pluralistic coordination mechanisms, is that, well, first of all, we're not here to impose any kind of definition. This is an open research panel, so we can all investigate around the concept and how we can understand it, and yeah, just kind of investigate a little bit more about it. So as we see it and the team sees it, and like our research understands the aestheticization processes as a way of creating more appealing, or I wouldn't say easier, but more appealing ways of engaging with the new technologies of how communities and groups coordinate between each other in the Web3 ecosystem. So it's about stimulating systems of mutual help and coordination. So from the technical and internal side to the outside sphere of these projects in a kind of like a transversal way. So it's not just about creating nice graphics, and it's not just about creating the right technology, but how these two things articulate between each other, and how the communities and the coordinated groups of people within our ecosystem that are doing great things are also creating new mediums, new creative coordination mechanisms, with better outputs, with better and more successful engagement. So yes, that's a little bit my take here. I don't want to bias you a lot, so thank you for listening. I will hand off the mic to my friend Salimi. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for passing on the mic. And yeah, the word is quite a mouthful, aestheticization. So hello, everyone. Super excited and super honored, to have you all here. And we have such amazing speakers today, as well as participants and guests. And we have Yana, Rafa, Maria, Steph. We have all these amazing people. And I will let the speakers introduce themselves and their work and what you guys have been up to briefly. And maybe you can also touch a little bit about your understanding on aestheticization of coordination protocols. So maybe you can infuse that in your introduction. So yeah, we can, no, in no particular order, but maybe on my screen I see Yana. So maybe we can start with Yana.
I had a feeling. Well, first of all, I just want to say hi to Maria, Steph, and Rafa, because these are the people that I deeply admire and respect in the space. Very excited to see everyone here. So I'm Yana. I'm leading Zora Zine, previously led brand and marketing at Zora. And before that, I mostly worked in culture. I had my own fashion brand and a media company, and worked in filmmaking as well. So I don't honestly have a lot of thoughts about aestheticization, just because I think that's my natural state of mind of, I don't understand how to exist or create or build without thinking how to inject cultural aspect in it. And culture usually comes within the visual communication channels or within visual medium. So I'll be probably just analyzing with you today on the go how it is possible to actually build and create without thinking about aestheticization. Damn, that's a challenging word. Let's choose another one. Let's call it making things visually relevant and culturally impactful.
Yes, just a quick note here, if I may. I think, the process of aestheticization is also trying to make or create mechanisms within or beyond just visual ways, right? It's like, how do you create a better inside process of the protocols to, be closer to, a wider audience, or a better adoption of the technologies. So the idea is not just to be in the in the top of the conversation, just talking about or the branding and all of that, but also the internal curation and the processes of how you coordinate your community and the inside part of the project.
Great info, thanks, Dominique. And I also sort of like see it from like this user experience, perspective, like how do you make things better and just more conducive for the community. So maybe we can move to, on my screen, I see Maria. So Maria.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Maria Paula, and I've been in the Web3 space since very early on, 2017. I've been involved in many infrastructure projects and different blockchains before falling in love with the Ethereum community. And I've also founded the Department of Decentralization. I no longer run it, but I started it and I ran it for 2 years very proudly. Now it's grown to a place where I felt like giving it to someone else that runs it really well, which is an organization that's dedicated to the education on decentralized technologies and exploring art. Finally, in 2021, right after the NFT boom started, I had finished my last paper writing about NFTs, art and creative coordination. And that's where I decided to start a business with a bunch of people that I met on twitter.com. And that's JPEG. JPEG builds cultural infrastructure for Web3 digital objects, so a fancy name for NFTs. And with regards to aestheticization, I want to take a step back a little bit in line with what Dominique said as well, and just think that how much we think, and of course, like I'm talking from also, the perspective of someone that actually started a protocol to explore art. So obviously, anything that I do is really visual, but there's people that cannot perceive aesthetics in the same way as we can. So in order to design systems, we need to get a lot better than dealing with aesthetics and visuals, and we need to create forms of accessibility for those people that also need cryptocurrencies and Web3 technologies. But they can't enter through aesthetics, which is a really easy way for us to access. And it's our first sort of like line of cognition. So it's just a step back and think of, how we design those systems for everyone and not just for the people that are, seeing them.
We can go to Rafa, then Steph. Thank you, Maria.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rafa. I work building Web3 communities and DAOs. Most recently, I'm working as a participant of the Summer of Protocols program, doing research on online communities and the protocols that they follow. I think this conversation is quite interesting because I think historically, when we think about in real life communities and networks, like aesthetics weren't necessarily a priority. The action was mostly the priority, and there wasn't kind of like as much of a meta layer conversation. In a very real sense, like the concept of community itself was secondary to just the work that needed to get done. And so it's kind of interesting to see this new design space open up, especially in online, where aesthetics play such a large role for signaling, where you don't necessarily have like an in-person experience to begin with. So I'm excited to hear more about that discussion.
Hey everyone, I'm Steph Alinsig. I spend my days leading media over at C Club, also in the process of launching my own thing here soon. I'm super stoked to be included on this conversation on the aestheticization of DAOs. I think that, I coming from the brand building world prior to Web3, obviously spent, I've been practicing. Yeah, coming from the world of brand building and Web 2 prior to Web 3, you know, obviously spent a lot of time thinking about, you know, this concept of aesthetics but more specifically for me, what is the felt experience of a brand or a community or a person? And this word aesthetics, like, I think it's very easy for us to take a look at the sort of superficial definition of it and like what are like the visual, linguistic, or like audio components of an aesthetic. But for me, the way that I've always approached building brands and also building community is like, what is the felt experience of that aesthetic, right? So what is it like to be in the room? What is it like to have a brand experience, even if it's digital, that makes you feel something embodied? So I feel excited to, explore that with everyone here.
Super exciting. So yeah, we can jump right into the topics, and I'll just to, you know, kind of guide everybody, especially our participants as well, in on the conversation. We're trying to go through these topics of discussion. So the first one is creative coordination from galleries to protocols. And then we have pluralistic coordination mechanisms offered by Web3, then aestheticization of DAOs, a new phenomenon in creative value coordination. Then we've got pluralistic coordination and creative output on and off chain, and creative civil proof and creative AI. So we might not maybe go through all of that today, but if time permits, we'll have to do that. So yeah, my first question goes to Maria Paula. So I'd love to ask, what are the key aesthetic goals for creators and communities that you see emerging in Web3, and how is this different from traditional notions and signal of success in creative industries, such as an artist being curated and featured by a gallery?
I don't think there's a lot of difference. Actually, we're more similar than everyone would ever think. I am usually really surprised by, however, what I said right now, how much experimentation is going on with regards to graphic design, especially in Web3. It seems that a lot more flexibility is possible in the realm of creating different brands. So I'm most interested not in artists, but in designers, actually, in this regard. I think what's happening with design is fascinating. I'm very excited to see different shapes and colors and items we wouldn't use normally also in artwork that come to life through the designs of like really incredibly talented people in the Web3 space. So that's the most special thing. With regards to artists, there's so many that are pushing the envelope forward with regards to aesthetics. I think the traditional art world is actually a little bit more evolved in this regard, because there's different constraints, and especially when there's a lot of experimentation happening in the Web3 space with art, with on-chain art, that brings its own aesthetic constraints. I think that those constraints are absolutely understandable in regards to, this is a work that happens fully on chain, which instructions are recorded on chain. The images created by a set of parameters that are actually happening as well on chain. And the beauty there comes from building all these highly complex machine that creates maybe a simple drop that looks like a combination of ASCII symbols. So there's a lot of beauty there that doesn't have to do with aesthetics, but with technical completeness in a way. With regards to aesthetics, there's I'm super into the art that Kaiken has been created. I know they're doing a world building now, new sort of a project now that's going to be rooted in Web3. And I have to say that the visuals on their website, I just saw them today, so I'm super fresh on these. The visuals on their website, they're translucent. They're as amazingly translucent and brilliant as as Yana's amazing highlighter. Actually, I have to say that's a great highlighter. They, and the way that everyone, yeah, sure, I'll share the link later. And the way that you navigate the website is a completely new experience that pops into your screen. So I think that's actually really sort of next level. They have also their traditional art, they're more traditional art and digital art than they are Web3. So, I wouldn't recognize them as Web3 just yet, but their project is Web3 native. So there's that. And but I have to say, I'm most interested in the design space and the aesthetic space that comes from on-chain experimentation, and that's quite constrained.
Very great points there. I would like to know if maybe any of our other speakers would like to chime in a little bit here. If you have any thoughts, if anything stood out for you while Maria was sharing.
I would love to add maybe regarding the design, because I think it's a super interesting point, and I'm just a little bit privileged to have a more in-depth conversation regarding the Web3 design, because my partner is actually a designer and art director who's working on some of the really interesting Web3 projects. And it's really interesting to see this kind of timeline, how when maybe during, the hype wave of 2021, a lot of Web2 designers or Web2 brands starting looking into the Web3, and they've been really frustrated with the quality of design. But to Maria's point, I think what's happening actually right now, that Web3 designers are starting, instead of just rejecting whatever past experience has been accumulated for UX and UI, they are looking into the things that they want to learn from it, and they want to learn from that, but they starting the whole new wave and the whole new aspect of experimentation with UX and UI. And this is, I feel like it's once in a generation probably opportunity, because, seeing through Web2, how we as a consumers get really trained through Web2 UX and UI, and now we're just, expect the button to look a certain way, or, just like retraining our brain. Web3 is really challenging this, and it gives a potential for people to find out and explore something interesting. So I think it's a really good point that Marie Paula brought up, and I'm very much aligned on this. There has been a lot of frustration, but right now it feels like if we do value what's been kind of created previously, and look into the best aspects of it, and then just transfer them and continue experimentation, that's how the new design system can be created.
This feels like super resonant for me too. I'm actually in the process of writing an essay with Patrick Rivera. It's going to be launched with the Foster C Club meta label zine that's coming out in a couple of weeks, but have just been thinking about this observation around design or aesthetics in Web3, and how we've like fully transitioned away from this like minimalist, like millennial, like repressed, like, emphasis on the design system from Web2 into this like maximalist, fully experimental, fully like, death of the logo, like expressive, like design system, so to say, in Web3, which is actually I would argue that we're moving beyond this idea of the design system, like which I feel like is such the basis of Web2 branding and Web2 design. And yeah, to me, that feels what's so exciting about like the aestheticization of DAOs is like, you have this like delightful, almost unexpected, but way more dynamic and textured experience of a quote unquote brand or community because of the shift away from what were just like, very understandably so, like predictable, design systems. Like, if you're going to go build on Shopify, here's this architecture that you then have to tap into, right? But if you want to go build on, I don't know, like I'm going to use nouns or any other, Web3 community, like it's what, maybe there's like a single sort of like meme or icon that you then can like layer over as many things as you want. But there's, I feel so excited by this move away from the rigid design system world of Web2.
Yeah.
I think sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add that something that really resonates with me is kind of pushing the boundaries in terms of design. I do think that there's a lot of overlap, and I really agree with Maria with regards to kind of like the technological component. I also think that there's a bit of a change in terms of the directionality of how the aesthetics are, how this media is created. So while a lot of previous work has kind of like moved into some sort of interactivity, in a lot of cases, the creators or the design teams, whether they be in video games or creating film, and there's a unidirectional approach of the design of the box in which the media exists. When we think about DAOs and when we think about new types of on-chain art, we're not just seeing the box defined by a creator or the designer, but we're seeing that the box itself is becoming designed by the participants of that community. And I think that's kind of leading to a new type of engagement and potentially new design spaces that might not be intuitive because they might not feel potentially even as clean or as symmetrical as what we've seen in the past, but actually are a reflection of the will of the community that's participating in the piece of media.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Rafa. I want to go back to a quote that Steffi tweeted on you, Steph, and it says, DAOs are not the future of work, they're social networks and consumer experiences. And I want to know, Steph, how do you see aesthetic layers playing out in the DAOs across the Seed Club portfolio that you have helped to incubate and coordinate? And also maybe you can like elaborate a little bit on that quote, like what was going through your mind when you read that?
I'm always a bit nervous when someone's like, I saw this thing you tweeted, and I'm like, I could either be in trouble or I've said something really brilliant. I have no idea. So I'm glad it was the latter. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think, you know, I happened to onboard to Web3 at the time when like this whole idea of like the DAOs as a future of work, and there's this big emphasis on bounties and coordination, which I think still matters here. But I think we learned so much over the last year that okay, you know, this idea of the future of work is actually trying to like kind of pigeonhole DAOs in this way that it limits us, right? That there's this whole other design space that we see DAOs jumping into, which I think is this idea of like DAOs as these micro social networks or consumer experiences. And I look at something like Boys Club, which is, you know, obviously in the Seed Club portfolio, as a great example, that, you know, even though like there's no really clear governance, there's no real like explicit like sense of like bounties or ways in which to like quote unquote contribute. The emphasis instead is on like who can you come be in this community. Like when I'm in my, you know, when I go to like the Boys Club Twitter page, or whenever I interact with them on Instagram, or if I go to a Boys Club party, I feel like I'm stepping into this like Boys Club persona that obviously exists in me all the time, but is able to be, I just like have this way to like express it or interact with it that I might not get in other places. And so I think that relates to this idea of aesthetics, right? This like persona. Yeah, I'm like becoming the meme, Louis in the chat. This like aesthetics or this persona that Boys Club is playing on the internet. I'm able to tap into that part of myself that I'm not able to tap into maybe in other places. And I see that as an opportunity for DAOs at large, right? FWB is another great example. Like, who can I be when I'm in the FWB mindset? And yeah, becoming the PFP. Same, you know, like, yeah. So that's what I was sort of implying in that tweet. Is like, yeah, that I think that's actually the opportunity for DAOs, and even at the intersection of aesthetics, it's like, who is the persona that we can be there? Because we are these like multi-hyphenate individuals, and it's a little. You know, Esther Perel talks about this a lot as it relates to relationships and partnerships. And she's been going on this new tangent around our relationship to work, that like we can't expect our relationship, whether that's our love relationship or our work relationship, to cover all of our wants and needs, right? It's just unsustainable. And I think the same thing with DAOs too. It's like we have this opportunity now to like go and be multi-hyphenate individuals across all these different DAOs and communities, and that's expressed through a strong aesthetic or persona across all the various touch points.
Can I add something really quickly? Because I think it's an interesting thing, and there's this concept of headless brand, and just kind of thinking about the earliest experiments of Zora, how they were approaching their brand building. They're actually they're building in public, and they had the public open Figma where, you know, at certain date or a certain amount of hours, people could plug in and jam together on the like this brand architecture. Now, like after we discussed that, I don't want to use this term anymore, or design system. We need to reframe it. We need to come up with the new terms. So, but they were like jamming on the logo, and people were, you know, collectively creating, and that feels like I feel like there should be more of this, you know, especially for the DAOs. I'm not sure about, you know, the protocols or, you know, more kind of like vertical companies, but if you are building a DAO, I feel like the headless brand or collective brand creation should be an equal part as a governance, you know.
Thanks for sharing that. I don't know if before we move, Maria, do you have any thoughts on it? We're getting a bit DAO heavy a little bit here, but maybe.
No, it's great. I've been following.
Yay, amazing. So in an article, actually, in the article Curation, Communities and Mechanism, Maria, you discussed that the role of coordination mechanisms in the NFT market. Can you explain what these mechanisms in Web3 are? Maybe your take on this with JPEG protocol and how such approaches might differ from traditional creative market mechanisms?
Yeah, sure. So at JPEG, we're currently focusing on creating context for artworks. So we're, you know, like anything about purchasing experience doesn't really come from us. We give people the tools to go and purchase on marketplaces like Zora or, you know, any kind of NFT marketplace. We are, however, developing a new drop, but it's not there yet. So, you know, it's too early to tell how we would influence any kind of marketplace mechanics directly. I would love to talk a little bit about like how curation works and how we decide as a community, maybe to just try to instruct a little bit how, you know, how our community, because it's not us, sees this whole, you know, coordination thing. Basically, JPEG it has two products. One of the products is exhibitions. Basically, that's an open platform where anyone and everyone can curate exhibitions of NFTs that they own and they don't own. So that's really nice. It can also operate as your own portfolio. You can create many exhibitions, so you have a cute little profile page so people can see the way your taste evolves, the way your interest evolve, the way you know, the explorations you're currently doing on particular artists or trends. So that's really like a tool for self-expression more than an exhibition making platform. And then on the other hand, we have a community resource that it's a little bit like a public good, but it's not, because it's a primitive for the NFT space. And that's called the JPEG canons. The JPEG canons are curated lists of NFTs around particular categories. I don't know if, like, of course, you guys have seen OpenSea and have seen the way that marketplaces are structured. And also because, you know, some NFTs have been around since a very long time and standards changed, then what we see is a lack of correct taxonomies, a lack of correct classification, and the JPEG community is creating these canons to help curate and taxonomically aggregate different classes of NFTs. We're also going to launch artist canons so that people can not only add their favorite collections, but also their favorite artists to the canon. And basically everything is proposed. Even the canons itself are proposed. We use Discord at first to get the canon proposals. Very soon we will have different mechanisms as well. And then every canon that gets selected gets published with a description, a criteria of the NFTs that should go there. And the proposer seeds three examples, three collections that they believe are fitting that criteria, and that's how a canon gets launched. Then proposals start, and every week we vote on the proposals. And that creates, new proposals added to the canon or rejected from the canon, because of course you can reject them. What's also actually quite cool is that no vote is actually permanent, such as nothing is permanent in our space. Everything is always changing, and we need to work with the assumption that there's boundaries being pushed every day. So we want to also create this kind of like dynamic space. So you can propose to remove different excuse me, different NFTs that you might think they do not fit the criteria. Of course, you have to fill out some kind of like text why you don't think, why you can contest these. And also you can repropose things that got rejected. So, the canon keeps refining itself, and ultimately what a canon looks in its completeness is basically a full list. I think the conceptual canon is actually a really good example. Also the dynamic one, it's actually a full list of collections of NFTs that have been voted by our community in a particular category. And you can also see in the dialogue boxes why the original proponent actually decided that NFT was canonically conceptual, for example. There's also discussions going on that help people make their decisions. So yeah, everything is quite, there is a structure, because there's a structure to the voting process, and there's a structure with regards to how proposals get passed and everything. But everything that happens in tandem with Discord, and Discord is quite unstructured, but it works. And I think trying to impose any kind of structure on Discord, creates like the opposite behavior in people. So you always have to leave a little bit of room for them to create their own coordination mechanisms.
Yeah, speaking of coordination mechanisms, I feel like we've got the community architect himself with us here, Rafa. And I want to know, like, there was a quote you tweeted that says, healthy communities support members in developing their identity instead of subsuming it. So I'm curious to know, how do you think belonging to a specific online community helps you build your identity and relevance?
So one of the things that I've been learning about is, and I guess thinking about, is the difference between fans, advocates, and members of communities. And a common trend that kind of happens is that we each have our individual identities. And when you're a fan, something that you're potentially doing is you're assimilating to the brand identity, which is pushed forward towards you. This is not a bad thing. This is a neutral thing, but it's something to take into consideration. So in many ways, as a fan, I am becoming part of the brand which has been defined for me. This process of being subsumed is I think a known process, which happens often when we really love a specific creator, and we want to be like them, or if we are a sports fan and we become the sports fan, which is very often defined values by the sports team themselves. Slightly different to that when we think about the other side of the spectrum. So if we move from advocate to probably something more like a member or a citizen, you kind of bring your identity with you. And this might be that you accentuate a piece of your identity that resonates, or we can think about the concept of attunement with the community itself. This can be really powerful. So the example that Steph provided with Boys Club, I think is a good example here, where Steph is tapping into a new piece of her identity by participating in the Boys Club ecosystem. So it's not necessarily the adoption of the Boys Club identity, but it's really about unlocking or discovering a new piece of yourself that you might have not necessarily been in touch with. And that's kind of where the power of community comes in, where what I was mentioning in the tweet is what's happening as a community is providing a path for the individuals to keep their individuality, coordinate with others or communicate with others, but more so than that, bring their identity and their individuality into the space of the community. And this is where that agency, it's a preservation of agency that allows us to be responsible citizens, which allows us to be accountable as individuals. When we don't do that, when we fully subsume, so the other side of the spectrum, in a lot of ways, what's happening is we're delegating our accountability to the brand. And when we do something that may not be correct or maybe morally ambiguous, we often say, oh, like, you know, if the brand didn't do that, you know, that's the brand's fault. They like miscommunicated with me with regards to it. Again, that can be challenging and puts a lot of accountability on the brand to say, if you are creating a cult-like offering, if you're providing a space that's really focused on the assimilation of the people who participate, then you have a lot of responsibility, and you should use that in a very conscious manner.
Yeah, this is great. I'm just curious to know, so like you referenced Steph in regards to Boys Club, and I'm thinking, so if you're a part of, let's say, a brand, but then you have your own sort of extended identity out of it, but then you still represent the brand. So what if you portray something that in a way contradicts with the brand? Then how does that
And I think this is exactly where maybe some more innovation comes in. You know, we can think about Boys Club again as a primary example, but we can also think about potentially Seed Club or Friends with Benefits. When your community brings a new aspect which may not be what you were expecting, in a lot of situations, that's an opportunity for growth for the community as their own presence. And so the community itself has an opportunity to say, hey, maybe this is something that our community really resonates with. If we think about, so Virgil Abloh did a collaboration with I believe Nike, and one of the things that he brought to the table was this style of work in progress, and that was actually counter to the brand principles. It was actually, Virgil had to like go through a lot of conversations to be able to be allowed to make a new product that didn't align to the brand guidelines. And in the end, pushed Nike forward into a new innovative space by not complying with the brand guidelines, but actually working outside of them. And I think that's the type of a relationship that communities and our next generation of brands need to have with the community members, with their citizens. It's a two-way conversation now. Everybody is a creative director.
Totally, yes, you're right. And talking about creative director and, moving towards that direction, I'd love to talk a bit to Yana. So Yana, you've recently launched the first zine with Zora. And I'm curious to know how you managed to curate the 22 participants and why these people are relevant to the Zora community. And finally, what is the fake product they're advertising?
Yeah, so just I know there's a lot of confusion around naming. So Zora Zine is actually the name of the publication that we've been running since 2021, and it was digital only. And a year ago, we just decided to create a print version, highly curated. Ideally, we're aiming to put it into the annual issue. We've collaborated with a really cool publisher named Actual Source, and finally, after many, many months of work, we were able to produce it and put it out in the public. There are actually more than 60 contributors in 22. It's only for the project that we call Fake Ads, and this is a little bit of an alpha because we haven't announced it properly yet, but we're kind of taking a sarcastic take on the glossy magazines and fashion magazines and how they have this, advertisement section in the beginning of each magazine. And we just decided, screw that. We just want to vibe out with the artists, and we collaborated with 22 artists from the space and asked them to create a fictitious advertisement for the non-existing Web3 product or service. So people really went off, and I cannot wait to present it to the community and show the artworks themselves. And that was our take on the advertisement. As it comes to the curation, I think it's just, and I have a feeling that Maria Paula would kind of understand me because I'm coming from the cultural background. I think there is a still kind of lack of some respect for the cultural production in Web3, and only a few players like, JPEG, they are achieving this goal. But if we look just at the landscape, it's still, it takes time to explain to people, the value, especially because of the hyper-financialization of the space. So it was, I really wanted to make sure that it's highly curated piece of like a collectible with the key players from both tech and culture coming from the early internet up to our days. So we were intentionally putting in conversations from different generations, from different backgrounds. But it is super important for me that with, especially in the early days of crypto, so many people who are very invested in the tech side, that we're just standing the ground of the cultural producers and cultural builders.
Thanks for that input, Yana. Also, there's a little voting situation going here, and everyone wants to see your shirt, so maybe may Yana stand? Okay. The internet is the infrastructure, I don't see, of society. Love it. Amazing. So thank you, Yana. My follow-on question, which is to you and also to everyone, all the speakers, is how can DAOs or other protocols in Web3 best successfully produce a culture of collaboration, support, and incentives for creators?
Can I just add some stuff because I love Zora Zine, and I love the people that they have been featuring, and like I said, I've been in Web3 since very early. I've been very inspired and by the early internet pioneers, which General Lanier is actually featured in Zine as well as very important cultural critics and people that have been observing what's been happening with the internet. And I think it's extremely important, especially in times where the word Web3 doesn't mean anything at all. And I sometimes find myself like behaving like an old man shouting at clouds, trying to explain what the hell does actually Web3 mean. Web3, your brand going Web3 doesn't mean that your brand's gonna mint NFTs. NFTs are just digital objects, digital networked objects. That's all they are, like they're very versatile. I love them too. I collect them too, but they're just one element of Web3. Web3 also doesn't mean that you will be able to own your artistic practice as good as that is, and as powerful as that is. Web3 is essentially a technological stack. It's very hard to read. I don't even know what half of that means, and I've been working in infrastructure for a very long time. And it's basically a stack of technologies that are all decentralized, self-sovereign, and they're all able to stack themselves into forming a new alternative system of communications, a new internet through which we can all operate with the assumption that everything is trustless or trustworthy, where it doesn't need to have intermediaries, that everything is decentralized, and that everything is that you can in ways or others, like also regain control of your data, of your financial I never know how to pronounce this word, sovereignty, and create alternatives to the current systems that have disappointed us in a way or the other. So I think what Zora Zine is doing is incredibly important because it brings us back to that in a way that it's accessible enough for everyone to understand and for everyone to just like think it's cool as well, because it's very visual, and that's so important. So I'm very excited about that.
I can only just say like plus 1,000, and it's not right now as I'm looking at this group of people. I think, I don't know if you guys did it intentionally or subconsciously, but knowing Maria Paula's background and having private conversations with Steph and Rafa, I have a feeling that we've all feeling betrayed by one way or another by the current systems, just in our personal stories. And that's why decentralization, in big quotes by Virgil Abloh, is extremely important aspect of us being in Web3. And it's, yeah, I think that's why we're probably still here and so deeply, you know, believing in this.
Steph, I see that you have a thoughts. Maybe you could you could go ahead and share.
Oh, I was just thinking, yeah, as Maria was talking just about the group of the sort of shared experience that is emerging across the speakers here. But I think I'm going to punt it over to Rafa. I think Rafa, you wanted to add a note on culture and valuation.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I mean, Steph and I, we've spoken a bit about this at length on the importance of understanding the value of culture and the fact that we need new models to think about it. I think, especially in the crypto environment, which is heavily VC focused, there's a specific model for valuation, which is based on product and, you know, TAM and all these like language around price, volume, demand, and supply. And we really don't have effective valuation processes for what we might want to call influence. And I was thinking, Yana, just wanted to echo your challenge here. And as this is being recorded, like ask the audience to start thinking about how do we solve for this problem? How do we solve for the acknowledgement of culture and that type of valuation, and that influence component? Thanks
for sharing that, Rafa. I have this quote that I don't know, like it feels or it seems fitting by Maria Paula, and it says right now whoever has a larger bags has more power, and they also sway the NFT market and decide what's culturally interesting as well. So we're hoping that if we can decentralize this registry creation taste-making tool and give power to people by crowdsourcing, then we will have a more level playing field for appreciating culture. And I want to open this question, like, could proof of creativity maybe be some sort of, a way forward to this? And I guess my question to you all is, how do you think skills should be included and represented in our on-chain creative identities as a tool for creative coordination in both creation and curation of culture? And how can we prove creative value on-chain and use this to direct funding?
I think cultural credentials don't matter too much with regards to in the Web3 space, just because everyone is nurturing each other, and you can see that in any community, really, like people are learning from each other all the time, and they are constantly evolving. I didn't start my Web3 career as a Web3 expert or as a founder. I got nurtured by so many people that made me change as well, and this happens to everyone. So I think that's I think that it's staying flexible to any kind of like different skill sets is really important, because it's such a growing space that this is really key to understand. Like, to understand Web3 people is basically to understand that everyone can flip, evolve, can rug pull, can become anonymous, can shapeshift. So it's such a fantastic space in that regard, because it's a free space. And I think, and another thing that I think how to create cultural value is actually to create context. So yeah, written publications are really important. Like working on preservation is incredibly important as well. Being able to read immutable ledgers in a better way than, learning how to read a smart contract, or learning even how to read Etherscan, which is simple for us, but it's not that easy for normies, is also really important in order to build a context-making machine, which, we have some parts, but we don't have it fully, and we need all of these pieces to come together.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on that too. I think this I mean, this feels like it relates to this idea of how do we value culture, and how are we going to deal with valuations, and how do we value properly assign value to social innovations. Yeah, I mean, I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine this morning. Culture, I think the hard thing with culture is it's like something that you recognize in retrospect. It's like hard to see it emerging around you and be able to be like, yeah, that right there, that's this culture. It's usually something that you can see in hindsight. And so that's just like a thing that we have to contend with. And I think especially as people who are generating and generating culture in cultural production, we often like currently are, especially those of us here in the tech space too, is like a lot of us are relying on venture capital to resource our cultural production, right? And venture capital is, it's fundamentally predatory. And I say that really flatly, right? Because what they're trying to do is put an X amount and then increase that to a different amount, right? To a much larger amount. And so that really relies on increasing scale over time. So, I mean, Salimi, I feel like the question that you asked is like, it's a question that I'm sitting with every day at every moment. I don't have an answer to it. I see it as something that's like, it feels like a real critical thing for us to figure out as we determine our like survival and how we thrive, especially in the face of like, AI and how ultimately tastemaking and cultural production and narrative, like those are really the only moats we have left, and community as well as like kind of wrapped into that. And so if those are really the only moats that we have left, how do we then actively or effectively, put valuations on those things and then effectively resource those things in a way that is not as predatory as we currently have. And as someone who, is in that venture space and, deals with venture-backed startups all the time, like it's the tool set that we have right now. And also it's fairly broken. But yeah, huge, that's such a big question.
Yes, it is a big question. And thankfully we can have these panels with amazing people like yourselves to help us process, go through them, discuss them. And you touched a bit on Steph, I guess you brought the AI factor into the conversation. So I'd like to know what you think, and to everyone else, with the rise of AI, how can DAOs and creators and DAOs protect themselves through creative proof?
I mean, I can since I dropped the bomb.
Okay, so we drop it on someone else. Like, so maybe we can drop
we can move past
drop it on. We can drop it on Yana. And then we can move it around.
I'm gonna pass it to Rafa at the moment while I collect my thoughts.
And can you rephrase the question? I was reading the comments.
I can maybe I'll just like provide a little more context for why I brought the bad word in. Yeah, I think this feels like it relates to this idea of like the aestheticization of DAOs, and also design and art and cultural production, and that like and how do we value cultural production, and like AI as a tool is something that's gonna be really present in this cultural production space, like as an entity, like in the way that the algorithm has become this thing that we all contend with, that it has its own persona, its own weight, that AI is here as well. That my take is that tastemaking, culture, narrative, brand, community, like those are the only remaining moats that we have. And so how do we, in the face of AI, how do we effectively push resources and value towards this last remaining moat?
I think there's an interesting challenge, which is I think if the financialization of culture actually will destroy the same cultural production mechanisms that we actually rely on. And I think it's worthwhile to ask ourselves if we actually do want that. Do we actually want production houses of culture to be profit optimizing engagements and investable vehicles? And I think the answer is probably slightly more complex than I may have given it credit for initially. When we think about what produces culture is actually not necessarily profit-making machines, but it's a byproduct, or it's adjacent to it. It's maybe even as a consequence of it, of the outcomes of other organizations. I do think, though, that one thing that is obvious to me is that when we think about culture production and artistic production, it comes from the class of artists and poets and other members of society that are often go underfunded or underserved. And I think that maybe the right answer is not necessarily at an entity level, but there is potentially other types of vehicles of investment which are not necessarily so focused on, you know, the VC environment or that type of investment.
I've been thinking about it a lot lately because specifically with the launch of Zora Zine and just, you know, kind of thinking about the decentralized media further and how decentralized organizations can find funding, which I think is another challenge on its own. I highly recommend check maybe, and I don't want to offend anyone, but I'm not a massive fan of Lex Friedman. However, he did a good episode lately with Sam Altman, the one of the creators of OpenAI, and Sam was talking about the model that they swapped to a few years ago, which is called a cap profit, which is, I think, an interesting model for us maybe all to, you know, explore a little bit more. And I'm also trying to find the bridge between, you know, nonprofit and for-profit whenever you're building a cultural production or even a public good, which is even further for being like a nonprofit. Right now, I have a hot take that cultural production should not be connected to the traditional models of VC. There is a new model for venture contributing, which is, you know, a lot of DAOs like NEWFORUM are exploring. If the VC company or the people behind the brand are experimental enough, open-minded enough, embracing, you know, the relationship coming with the cultural producers, understanding, you know, what value they're getting outside of just the immediate profit and capitalization, then great and amazing. That creates, you know, opportunity for experimentation. Traditional VCs, I would definitely say hard no, just hard no.
Yeah, I have to agree with Yana here. You know, it's really hilarious to me when VC types or big tech people come to Twitter and they start tweeting about how journalism would be. I think it's also a fascinating phenomenon. I'm like, is there anything else you want to mansplain me? I think it's fascinating to see them as well talking about AI. And, you know, AI facilitating things, because AI is just aggregating information that the internet already has, and that information has been supplied through years and years and years and years by humans. So, you know, like there's no skipping humans in terms of cultural production. There is obviously and I have to say I'm super pro AI for many different reasons. But I think the most, there is an obvious challenge with immediate replacement of people by AI, especially, you know, with regards to, you know, like more basic content production or research. And, you know, even mathematicians, I think they were on top of the list the last time I checked. But that will happen just for a short time. People will specialize, people will fine-tune their careers, and people have always adapted to new technologies. So there's absolutely no indication that AI will just render us all obsolete. We'll just get smarter and we'll find ways. I saw, for example, a tweet of a copywriter that unfortunately, and you know, it's really shitty because AI is not even funny just yet, that got sacked from their job. And someone was suggesting them to actually win over AI and, you know, prepare themselves as you know, like specialist in prompts, which is so important because the kind of information that AI is providing right now is not sophisticated enough, in part because the prompts are also not sophisticated enough, and you need to continue working in an iterative way with the AI to create a good production. So that's an entire job by itself. And the same will happen with like more visual production with regards to AI. The more people use AI to generate their images, to generate even logos in the future, the more like a selective eye will be needed, for example, and that eye can only be supplied by humans. And the testing will have to be done with A/B testing and brand test, and focus group also formed by humans. So I think the two things go together. But I do think that, and like Yana said, VC shouldn't have any intervention with regards to when it comes to journalism, any kind of cultural production, just because of the obvious bias and the notion that they can replace or produce anything, which is totally false. And most of the times, you know, the things that they come up with are actually ahistorical, or they lack a like understanding of different disciplines.
So what would you all say is missing in the tech stack for us to get the funding of cultural production right now?
Imagination, probably.
100%. More imagination. That's the tech stack piece that we're missing.
We're too focused on the production of the culture, which is a very taxing, it's very taxing labor, you know, and sometimes we don't have like either the business know-how, the same as tech people don't have the business know-how to run a company, and then you end up with awful CEOs just because, you know, they were brilliant developers that evolved into turning to be CEOs. You know, cultural producers don't have to be the providers of the funding for their projects. So, you know, like we need to be able to put together different teams that have different expertise to be able to, you know, find revenue streams and to, you know, come up with innovative funding models as well.
I'd really add, and not to sound very dramatic or even stupid, but sorry, just because I'm coming from the post-Soviet country, I think it was interesting for me to grow up in the country or the society where there was no concept of money. It's like someone recently, I had like an argument at Zora when I was like, I don't understand speculation, and they're explaining it to me, and I was like, I just can't, like I've spent in capitalism only 6 years. I don't understand what's like this. It was prohibited in my childhood. So I think just in America, it's very difficult because it's a capitalist country. Everything is about money and driving profits. So if you just put the value of any other value that's there, you know, and we're only talking about culture specifically with this group, but there are any other different types of value. I think we should just, you know, there should be more understanding of this type of value, because right now we should just focus on capital and hyper-financialization. And if that, I think it's very idealistic, but I'm the believer, if that can be fixed, then the new models for monetization will be arising.
Any more thoughts on this before I jump onto my next question? And I guess since we're talking a bit about, you know, AI and all of that, its role in all of this, we took the time to ask the famous question, and the question was, what are the important considerations in the process of the aestheticization of a DAO and Web3 based protocols? And this is what they had to say. It is important to know that while aestheticization of a DAO and Web3 based protocols can be beneficial, it should not come at the expense of the community's core value and principles. The focus should always remain on the functionality and transparency of the DAO or protocol smart contracts and decision-making processes. So what are your comments on this? And then I guess we can then open it to our amazing participants to hear from them. They can also ask us questions, ask you questions.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like this is a fairly average interpretation of what a DAO is and an average interpretation of what aesthetics are. So like my initial reaction to this actually has to do with we're comparing and contrasting two things which may not be as binary as ChatGPT actually suggests. So in many cases, the smart contracts and the decision-making process are actually the aesthetics of a community itself. If we think traditionally how communities interact with each other, that is the aesthetics, and often the imagery that emerges from the type of decisions that we make is representative of the culture that we have. I do understand, though, that I think it's quite interesting the contrast here provided where we can fall into a position where we become anchored to the images which we have had and end up maybe coercing ourselves or in our social networks to maintain the specific image.
Rafa just, nailed it there. I agree with everything. So fabulous take. It's really spot on.
I think, I really like what Rafa says about like this being just a kind of very basic interpretation maybe of a DAO is, and maybe I'm just not thinking about the accountability, and maybe that's on the key players of the Web3 industry that we're not doing good enough of a job of experimenting with models or explaining, what different DAOs can be, because especially after the hot DAO summer, everything becoming a DAO feels like it's just been lost in the weeds a little bit of a definition, and those who are hardcore decentralized believers, decentralization believers, maybe we should do a better job on explaining it, articulating it.
That's a good one, Yana. I think before I open to the audience, actually, I would love to hear Steph, because about maybe like last year we had your NEWFORUM and then you gave a definition. I don't have a quote, but you did say that it evolves all the time. So I'm curious to know, well, how would you define a DAO today, right now? And then we can open it to everyone else.
Oh my gosh, I was going to ask me to define a DAO. I honestly still I don't feel like I have a super great definition from that. And I think it's like, how do you define a company? How do you define a community? How do you define I think it's just one of those things. It's a scissor label. It's just the word that we have right now. That's describing some version of like groups of people at the intersection of tech, at the intersection of an idea. Well,
it's like constantly evolving. So but I'd like to say thank you to Rafa and Maria Paula, because I know they have to jump off. So I want to say a quick thank you. It was such an honor chatting with you, and we will open it to the audience.
I think I have a question for Yana, if I may. So I'm a very, very big fan of Zora, and I am extremely excited for Zora Zine. I know we touched on that a little bit. But I would like to know how the curation of the people that participate in the Zine, contributes to the community that you're building. How do you select these amazing people to be part of that Zine, and how that adds to the community that surrounds you?
So I'll speak about the print issue because there's also like a digital, and I think for the print issue it was a little bit of a different process because we chose a topic. The topic is intergenerational dynamics, and we landed on the topic because especially during the hype bull market, there was a very popular take on Twitter where people were like, Web3 is not Web2, but we really love the nostalgia of Web1. So we wanted to explore that and see what is it so, appealing about Web1 to Web3 builders, and why it's almost like, and we wrote a manifesto about this once, it's going to be released next week. It's almost like Web3 felt at that moment at its teenagers stage, being a teenager who says like, I don't want to have anything in common with my parents, but my grandparents might be actually cool hippies. So we felt like that at that moment, and we wanted to explore how different generations talk to each other. We talked to the first editor of the Whole Earth Review, and who is the creator of the Wired magazine, Kevin Kelly. And I think he's one of the core contributors to Web1, right? And just the tech wave. So it was really important to hear his thoughts on the blockchain. We spoke to Jaron Lanier, who is the godfather of VR, and we wanted to take his take on the blockchain as well. And then we obviously spoke to like very young, up and coming, cool artists from Web3, and just kind of trying to bring them together. But what I was saying previously before, it's just coming from the cultural background and cultural journalism, as my team does. Not everyone from culture is gracing with their presence Web3. Some people are extremely critical, and we just were trying to see who's actually proactively thinking about Web3, who's proactively thinking about blockchain and interested in this topic, and they have something to say, because that feels like these people are going to be shifting and they're moving with time, like others just prefer to stay in their comfort zone. So I think that's how naturally the curation was happening.
Thank you so much, Yana. I know that you have to drop off. So yeah, thank you. Really super insightful as always. Do we have any more questions? Probably Steph might need to jump off soon as well.
Yeah, but I really appreciate the conversation. It was so, what a beautiful panel everyone put together. And yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Steph, so much. Like, yeah, we're always like looking for all the tweets and absolutely love them. This conversation was amazing. When we were putting it together with Salimi and Dominique, thinking about this concept of the aestheticization of DAOs and protocols at large, it was really like a big reflection in a way of like the process that we've been through building with the community and building, for example, like the New Life app. This was really, let's say, the philosophy behind the way of building that space, because everyone who was using the app and like giving feedback at the very beginning, especially like this process of co-creation that Rafa was talking about as well. We were talking a lot about identity and how we are co-producing identities at the same process, and like what content would I put there and how would I signal and all these kind of things that was essentially your new life self. And that's what people were talking about. That's my new life self. I wouldn't put that on different network, for example. And trying to create these safe spaces for aesthetics to thrive, and then thinking about how, it's a huge challenge, but how ultimately you can decentralize the curation aspect so that you can have the community-owned AI. So Nuvi was always community-owned AI for aesthetic investigation, essentially. And we kind of got to the point, I would say, where the curation and the mechanisms, the algorithm, and the input from people co-producing identity and aesthetics meant that it was really genuinely respected outside also of the community, where one artist was mentioned as like top 5 ranking in a Dazed article, top 5 rank on New Life, and then a year later became the #1 in the Dazed top 100. So it really shows the power of like emerging cultures, and how if you can produce the right mix of like technology and aesthetic awareness, you can actually create the right community-owned algorithms and mechanisms for that to happen. And that's really where our whole journey is, and that's kind of like where we're forming and specializing in a tech perspective. And that's why I love what Maria Paula was also saying, that the reason why that technology might not come is because you do need to have a mix of teams who understand, on the one hand, the ability to execute technically and have engineers, but you need to have this sensibility and sense making of what is an aesthetic process, what is happening in a broader perspective. And that's why we want to do these forums, is to bring that knowledge and sense make together. And that's really where we've been flowing, is having that combination of ways of thinking, but never putting engineering before that sense making process and that co-production of aesthetics. So yeah, that's really like, you know, why I'm so in awe of like different people in the community and team, of how they're able to be in those modes and at the intersection of that and actually produce something of meaning out of that. So I think this is like where I'm super excited, is that continuous process and thinking about the mechanisms, the protocols, but looking at it from a sense of the aesthetic production and the aesthetic process that's happening as a design lens, let's say, towards that. And ultimately about the curation aspect, I think is really important. And then now, for example, like connecting a lot with the transition of Gitcoin, I think really speaks to me, and having this new lens of artistic direction. And Cece is here, Boris is here, and we're talking a lot with the whole team. Yana and Scott and Kevin have also been on like a lot of NEWFORUM sessions. So I think it's really been interesting to like learn from a first-hand perspective of all of that community's experience of how do you do the curation technically, but also merge aesthetically. And that's been a new transition process for the Gitcoin community. And doing those two modes is hard. And so I'm so excited to see what happens there. And that whole process is very interlinked, I would say.
I'm Cece. I'm the art director of Gitcoin. Just recently became the art director of Gitcoin, and my background is really in design and culture. I started in fashion, but eventually moved into creative direction. I was creative director of Sophie, the electronic musician, for a while. So hearing this conversation is refreshing to me. I feel like joining Gitcoin at this moment is really exciting. Some people are calling it Gitcoin's renaissance, and yeah, I love that. I love being part of that moment, and I love also what Steph said about the idea of defining a DAO is like defining a company. Not all companies strive for a certain level of aesthetics, and it's the same for DAOs. And yeah, I hope that I mean Boys Club, Zora, all of these DAOs that have been mentioned today are definitely on that list for me, and I hope that Gitcoin is as well at this point. Thank you all for the conversation.
Thank you for joining. And you know, as we mentioned during the call, as the aestheticization of coordination mechanisms is not just only the visual part, but the visual part and the art direction side of it plays like a huge role in communicating the internal things that are happening, right? So it's this all-encompassing revolution or renaissance, as you mentioned it, that happens in the technology side for making things, you know, more appealing and more easy for the people and to create better outputs. But also is so interesting how we really always need the audiovisual and the art side of it to actually make things happen and articulate in the right way. So congratulations for being the recent art director of Gitcoin, and thank you also for taking that huge responsibility that is, you know, bringing the technology to everyone and making sure that the message gets through, right?
Yeah, we've got a really amazing team and a great creative director as well at Gitcoin now. So I know we're definitely leaning into this direction of aestheticization.
I have to say, like, a lot of things has changed, like during this 6 months. Like there was so many things happening, like good and bad, but I feel like right now it seems like now the direction is like we miss like a lot of conversation, like how we can help support artists, especially when the technology, all the infrastructure is being built, but it's not recognized, and because like of all the bad PR that we hear about, like for example, like FTX and everything, and they were like, okay, now crypto is a scam, and like, okay, all the people who talks about art and how we can support them is kind of like a Ponzi scheme. So it becomes even more difficult to have like more people to know what this technology can, because of the like the overall people are seeing the space. The question is like, how can we make sure that to say like what the technology can, how we can support artists, and how DAOs can actually support the communities, because like right now it's much more difficult, and especially because like Instagram decided to sunset the NFT, which make it even more difficult to basically say like, hey, this is a very legit technology. And yeah, so the question is like, how can we tell to people who is not into crypto to understand how you benefit as an artist, as a collector, with the recent because like bear market, the people are like not trying to invest or even speculate, and also with the Instagram, it's very even more difficult to see like NFTs are legit technology to support artists. So it became even more difficult to be in the space, especially with people who's not there and doesn't know what is happening around, and only see the bad side instead of the good.
Yeah, I guess it's getting kind of over time. So very quickly, I want to comment on that and a few other things from before. First off, thank you, NEWFORUM team, for hosting another great talk. This was super interesting. Looking forward to joining more, hopefully. CC, welcome to Gitcoin. I also joined recently, and yeah, there's definitely a lot of good people here. And I think the whole brand direction, creative direction, it's such a big part of our mission to fund public goods and like make donating to charity, essentially funding public goods a cool thing to do, that you're not necessarily doing it for profit, but because of prestige maybe, and because you want to signal support for things that are actually important and you want to fund what matters. And on that note, I mean, all your points just now, Victor, about artists in Web3 using this technology to support artists, like I don't have an answer to those questions, and I think they're really good questions. But what I will say is, I think through Gitcoin, we now have this opportunity to let communities like the Web3 artist community have their own rounds and run their own rounds as a community in a way that will actually benefit that community. So if any of you, this is like an open call, if anybody wants to sort of operate that kind of round, I'm here to help. I just did that with the decentralized science community, and we're like going to be having our round soon. So it's a bit of an experiment in like letting a community that's decentralized run a round instead of like a company coming in and sponsoring a round. But I would love to help bring people together to answer those questions. So let me know.
And I think this layer of like also UX and design is is basically what can also get new identities coming into the space, because maybe it's easy and then like you get feedback from people who get really familiar with that process, but then when you actually want to fund public goods that are maybe something more artistic, or like something that isn't just pure code, and you have an audience that aren't just pure developers, like trying to do the grants and trying to wrap your head around the whole thing, I think that like layer of aestheticization is basically really important there, because it's also like translating that process of meaning making, where it's like, okay, why do I even want to do that? What could I make? And then somehow through the brand and through the interface, like communicate that possibility somehow. And it's like a transition that's really beautiful to see in the community.
Thank you all so much. This was amazing. And we're looking forward to the next open panel. We will send out the invitation very, very soon.